In a year that sees notches becoming pop-up mechanisms and budget devices becoming more and more prevalent, LG have gone with a slightly different approach for their newest flagship, the LG V50 Thin Q. Now, you'd be forgiven for perhaps not realizing that the V50 was even a thing, particularly given that LG released the V40 not even a year prior to the release of this phone. And so it's worth mentioning that the standout feature that makes the V50 different from its predecessor is the fact that it comes equipped with 5G capability. However, there are some other changes that come under the hood, as well as a really interesting feature that can either be purchased separately or that will actually come shipped with your device depending on where you live, and that is this case that actually turns the LG V50 into a dual screen phone. But more on that later. So as mentioned, the phone is nearly identical to the V40. You have the same 6.4-inch OLED display with a punchy resolution of up to 3120 by 1440. You have 6 GB of RAM. The phone comes shipped with Android 9 Pie. There's still an expandable micro SD card slot, and the phone is still IP68 water and dust resistant. Some of the upgrades that do come with the V50 though include the fact that we're now running on the Snapdragon 855 processor. We also have 128 GB of internal storage, and we also have a 4000 mAh battery inside to handle those potential 5G battery drains, although this does result in the phone being slightly thicker and noticeably heavier in the hand than the V40. Aside from that though, the cameras are identical, 3 on the back, 2 on the front, and we still have that slightly outdated but fairly decent glass and metal design with a middle of the road size notch at the top of the display and slightly larger than average bezels all the way around. For the software, we still have LG's UX skin running over Android 9.0 Pie. And look, it might not be nearly as good in my opinion as stock Android or Google's Pixel experience, and it's not my software skin of choice, but it's definitely not the worst skin either. For the most part, moving around the UI, particularly with a third-party launcher installed, feels pretty familiar. You'll just notice some interesting design choices in terms of UI elements and various transitions that just don't look or feel quite as polished. So then the biggest potential change from the V40 though is that the V50 now has the option to be mounted into this dual screen folding accessory case. And for me, this seems to be a decision that's been made off the back of the hype of the Samsung Galaxy Fold and Huawei Mate X devices. Once you've got your phone mounted into this dual screen accessory case, you'll quickly see that the functionality is actually very different from those folding devices. And in this case, pun intended, these are actually just 2 separate displays rather than one large extended display. So this means you can multitask like an absolute champ and have one app open on one screen and another app open on the other. But for that single screen tablet-like experience, this dual screen folding case is pretty far off the mark. So the issue with many of LG's devices, including the V50, is that they always seem to fall into this category of being a jack of all trades, but master of none. And by that, I mean that the V50 seems to hit all of the marks that make it fit right into 2019 as a top-tier flagship device. You have a bright and sharp OLED display, a multitude of cameras with varying fields of view, you have a glass and metal design, an IP68 rating, a big battery, the latest Snapdragon processor, and yet, despite checking off all of these key high-end components, none of these features on the V50 are the best at doing what they're meant to do compared to other phones on the market. Where the V50 does separate itself from the pack though, is in regards to audio. Given its removal on the Note 10, it is perhaps the last flagship device that comes with a 3.5mm headphone jack, and that really is an indication of how audio is a pretty high priority for LG and their flagship devices. This input also still comes with that 32-bit hi-fi quad DAC, which means you can get the highest audio quality listening experience on this phone when listening through a pair of wired headphones. The phone's also got a boombox speaker that can rattle the table if you have your volume set high enough, and the speakers do get really nice and loud as well, although I have heard speakers on other devices that have more clarity at those higher levels of volume. So look, if you're looking for a phone that can do pretty much anything and everything you would want a high-end smartphone to do, without necessarily being the best at any of those things, but still probably being in the top 5, then the V50 is definitely worth a shout. But if you're looking for the best in-class camera performance, or the cleanest software, or the most eye-catching design, then you may want to wait and see what else is coming before you go ahead and purchase this phone. But one thing is for sure, if you're looking for a flagship device and your number one priority is wired audio, then the V50 may actually be the only option left.